going to introduce Referrals. Thank you so much for joining us and participating in the first day of Comp Laude. Thank you, panelists, as well. I'm so honored that you could be here. We're striving to make the industry more positive. I don't even so nervous, but we're working to make it positive because we do a lot of great things. So thank you all for being here, and I'll see you guys on the other side.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your support always. Really, really grateful that all of you have decided to take a few moments from work, a few moments of your own personal time to join us. Before we get started, definitely want to thank Work Comp Central for their leadership, for their ongoing support, for allowing us to present here today on what I think is a really special topic. Specific shout out to Christian, to Yvonne, to Chase, and to Courtney. It takes a village to put these types of events together and to make sure that they run smoothly, and a village they are. Just love them and truly grateful for their assistance in making this presentation an awesome experience to be a part of already. Let's get started. I want to introduce you to this wonderful panel that's here with me. Chase, let's go to the next page. Oh, what a wonderful picture. Look at that handsome guy. I want to introduce you to Molly Kaelin. Molly is president and CEO of MKCM Inc. She is owner of what I think is one of the most remarkable stories really in our industry. Over 400 case managers throughout the country providing national case management. She comes to us with over 30 years of experience in that particular work in our workers' compensation industry. If you've seen her before, and I'm sure she's no stranger because she speaks on a national basis throughout the country, even at regional events, on all sorts of topics in the workers' compensation arena, especially when it comes to case management. She believes strongly in mentoring. I know that with certainty as I've seen her over the years mentor professionals and mentor especially young folks coming into our industry. So Molly, welcome. We're grateful and appreciative you accepted my invitation.
Thanks so much, Rafi. And I want to thank everybody in the Comp Laude group and Work Comp Central, and it's a pleasure to be here. Today I'm going to kind of kick it off, our webinar, and we can go ahead to the first page.
Let's actually, before we
do
go,
introductions?
Yeah. Let me finish so that everybody knows who's on there with us. Dr. Geraldine Dotz. If you've not met Dr. Dotz, boy, oh boy, what a loss. You really take the time to get to know her, to introduce yourself, to develop a relationship with her. I am grateful for having met her, a decade ago and having developed a relationship with her. She truly is, in my humble opinion, one of the best resources in the entire work comp industry. She's amazingly knowledgeable, caring, just a top-notch expert. As you see there, she's president of Southern Behavioral Medicine Associates. She's a licensed health psychologist, and she treats folks every single day, helping them through the struggles that a work injury may possibly have personally and with family situational. You'll hear her today talk about what social determinants of health and can do to mental health and the family, and the ongoing attempt at making sure that folks stay as healthy as possible. Dr. Dotz, always grateful to spend time with you. So wonderful that you were able to join us. Thanks. All right. And last but certainly not least, we've got Natalie Torres also joining us on the panel. Natalie is Senior Director of Client Solutions with WorkFinders. Again, if you have been in this industry for a while, you have seen her, you have heard her speak about return to work issues. We are blessed. If there's anybody out there who I think presents the
So Natalie collaborates with brokers, carriers, employers, and third-party administrators to skillfully interpret the impact of return to work and the multidimensional view of the return to work process to support mitigating current and future risks. So we're so happy to have Natalie here on the panel with us. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you all in the conversation today.
If you want, I'll just keep pinch hitting until Rafi. Oh, it looks like Rafi's back. No? I'll go ahead. Today, we're going to be talking about the following topics. Social determinants, the impact on case management and claims, and that's what I'm going to discuss. Then the social determinants, mental health and recovery implication, what Dr. Dax is going to discuss, and the social determinants and the impact on return to work, and Natalie is going to finish up with that. So with that, perfect segue. I'll go ahead and I'll get started. So again, I'm Molly Kaelin with MKCM, and as Rafi mentioned, I have 30 years plus of experience. I started, like many of you, when I was 5. But I'm very happy to be here today and to discuss the following. You can go ahead to the next slide. So I think what's really important for all of us to understand and realize in our niche in the industry is that it's so important to look at the injured worker and your claims from a holistic perspective. If we don't look at things from a holistic perspective, you're not going to get the best results on your claims. And the team members, the people that are involved on the claims, they all have to understand that it's not just about the injured worker and their injury. It's about the social, cognitive, emotional, and physical situation that the injured worker is in. And you can just think of yourself, you know, you are a totality. You are not just one element. And when someone gets injured, it affects all those levels. And the diagram that you can see, it splits the person as a whole into the physical, cognitive, emotional, and social parts of their being. So again, the holistic approach is looking at all of those elements when you're dealing with an injured worker and having them go through the process. Next slide. So I wanted to do a quick little slide to explain to you what SDOH, which is social determinants of health, actually is. As you can see, it's economic stability. So it's the economic aspect of that person's life, what they're going through economically. And nowadays with COVID and what's going on, it has a huge impact on everybody economically. And it might not be the impact on the injured worker itself, but it could be the impact on the spouse, a significant other, or somebody else that that injured worker is depending on in their home. Then it also consists of the social and community context, and I would put in there cultural as well. Those of you who've been in this industry a long time, like myself, know that there's a huge cultural component that affects the social determinants of health. And that's important to recognize as well. Next is neighborhood and the environment, where they're living, what their environment, all the way from their home to what's surrounding their home looks like, healthcare, and finally, education. Next slide. So this is my good old-fashioned Venn diagram that we used to see back in the day, and it kind of splits up for you who the team members are in workers' compensation. And I say the word team because we all are a team, and we all work together. But sometimes the elements of the team, each team member might have a different goal. And we have the attorney, medical providers, those are the PT, the doctors, the claims management, that's the risk managers, the employers, and then and the adjusters, and the injured worker. And it's so important not to forget the injured worker. They are the key element in this team, because when an injured worker feels disenfranchised, when they feel not empowered, when they're not educated, when they don't participate in their rehab plan, then what happens? It goes psych. It goes legal, it goes pain management. And that is a domino effect on the results of your claim. It's going to drive your claim costs up. It's going to make them go legal. So as case managers, we find that it's so important that we have to educate that injured worker, make sure they understand exactly what's going on, because they walk out of a doctor's appointment and lots of times they don't hear what we hear. So we have to explain things to them and make sure that they understand and have realistic expectations for what their rehab is going to consist of. So again, it's unifying the focus, making sure that everybody is communicating, and you see case management is right in the middle, because that's our job, is to make sure that everybody is communicating on this team and the right hand knows what the left hand's doing. Next slide. So I'm just going to do a brief little overview about what case management is and when's the time to use it. So there's different types of case management, and that's my next slide. But field case management, what we do is we attend physician visits. We attend therapy visits as necessary. We go on site for job analysis if we need to. We coordinate medical care between all parties. We speed up the process to enable quick return to work and stay at work, actually, and save dollars. We're eyes and ears on the case, meaning we're watching how the injured workers, when it's field, come into the appointment and how they leave. We're watching if the doctor bends them over and the doctor rolls their eyes. That's all important information from us, but that's never going to be in an email, because if a case isn't legal now, it has the potential of being legal later, and everything's discoverable. Real-time updates. I remember back in the day, we had to mail work statuses. It took 3 days before anybody knew what a work status was, but now there's no reason. Everybody's scanning and in the email world. Preventing referrals to psych, pain management, and overuse of medication. Basically, what we're trying to do as case managers is contain the claim. We're making sure the injured worker gets the best medical care, but we're also making sure they get the appropriate medical care. And we go back and get detailed medical history, old medicals, old diagnostics if we need to clarify what's old and what's new. We schedule conferences with doctors. That's a tremendous asset, meeting one-on-one with the doctor, face-to-face, having a letter prepared, clarifying issues. And we review job descriptions with physicians. And that's really important, because lots of times the injured workers present a job as one thing, but what the reality is something different. So we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Next slide. So here's the types of case management. There's telephonic case management, and that's exactly what it is. That's when we're coordinating medical care, but it's purely done by phone. We don't meet with anybody in person. There's field case management, which is just like what I described. We're going to the doctor's appointments, going to physical therapy, going to on-site. Catastrophic case management. When you have a catastrophic case, we go to the hospitals at bedside. We're coordinating with the family, educating everybody, planning discharge. And then there's vocational case management. When an injured worker's injuries preclude them from going back to their original position, we have case managers that help them by finding alternative employment, doing testing, etc. And then there's different types of case management within that. There's task assignment, and a task assignment is a kind of a one or two shot deal. We need somebody to go one time and meet with the doctor. We need someone to go one time and get medical records, or to go to one doctor's appointment, or to schedule a conference. That's a task assignment. Then there's full field, where we get on at the start of the case and then we stay on for the duration. Catastrophic case management, and vocational, as we mentioned. Next slide. So now I want to kind of layer the social determinants of health on top of case management, so you can kind of see the filter and how it should work together. So the outside ring is pretty much what the tasks are of what a case manager does. Case manager does screening, assessing, we're planning, we're doing all those kinds of meta kind of activities in order to move the file forward. And then that middle ring is more looking at the SDOHs, the social determinants, looking at the psychosocial concepts of what's going on with the injured worker, the rehab of the injured worker. So you really need to marry those two levels in order to get a holistic approach. And then I wrote here, empathy and education leads to empowerment. It's 100% true. You know, as a case manager, we know that it's so important to develop that relationship with the injured worker, develop trust, to have empathy, and to educate them, because, you know, we don't know what their life situation is unless we're asking them. And that's on another slide. We're going to talk about that. And then the last thing is increasing empowerment leads to decreased legal, psych, and pain management. Next slide. So this slide kind of addresses what I was leading to, looking at case management then, the more traditional way, versus now the more holistic way, keeping in mind SDH. So traditional case management, you would ask questions of the injured worker that really only revolve around the injury. And in fact, when I started case management back in the day with the first case management company that started case management, we were told, do not ask any questions about their personal life or anything like that. You don't want to get involved. And while it's true on some level, case managers have to maintain that objectivity, you can still ask. And I think that knowledge is power. So asking those types of questions is going to give you much more of an insight into who you're dealing with and how they're going to be coping Traditionally, we didn't delve into their lives. It was more of a unilateral approach, no or little modification how you manage cases. It was almost kind of like a factory kind of approach. You know, you meet with the injured worker, you ask this list of questions, you don't deviate from that, and you go about what you need to do in a pretty prescribed manner. And the last thing I have here is once a case closes with its MMI, maximum medical improvement, no further interaction with the injured worker. I mean, we were always told MMI, boom, you're done. And I'm going to switch to the right side and address that. So now the holistic approach to case management, you do want to ask those questions at SDH at your initial interview and share it with the team. So you want to ask that injured worker, give me a sense of what your home life is like right now. What's any pressures or socioeconomic issues that are going on with you I need to be made aware of, especially now going in with COVID-19. Are there any concerns or things that I need to be aware of that are outside of your injury? But again, that information is key, but if it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't serve a purpose. So as a case manager, once we get that information, we need to share that with the other team members, the employer, the adjuster. However, keep in mind, if anything is personal and private, we don't do that. And if anything is a little too sensitive, that's not anything we're going to put in an email. That's something we're going to communicate by phone. I'm always talking to my case managers. We've lost the art of phone calling. It's so important to pick up the phone on so many different levels. Emails can be misread, and certainly if it's sensitive, you don't want to put in an email. The next thing is constantly reviewing the injured worker's SDH issues during the life of the case and assess the impact on healing, return to work, medications, and treatment. So what I mean is SDH is not static. It's changing. Think about it. Your life situation is constantly evolving and changing. The people that you live with, things are changing. Your injury, how you cope with this injury. So it's so important that as case managers, we're checking in with the injured worker all the time through the life of the case to see if anything has changed. And all those things affect return to work. They affect medication usage and treatment. And if there's something that we feel it's important to share with the provider, as case managers, we need to do that too, or encourage the injured worker to do that themselves. And then last, the thing about MMI, you know, when an injured worker reaches maximum medical improvement, it's our job as a case manager to explain to them what that means. And not only what the term means, but what does this mean for the life of their case? What if they have an exacerbation of pain? What does that mean? Where do they go? Who do they call? So again, as case managers, holistically, we don't want to just cut the case off. We want to explain everything to them. And I always would let my injured workers know that, hey, if you have ever a question down the road, here's my contact information. I'm always available to you. Next slide. So today we came up with a basic kind of scenario for the rest of the speakers to address SDH. Our scenario is we have a 50-something injured worker who's in construction, the high school education, male, married, several young children, comorbidities of high blood pressure and diabetes, back injury. Most of his work experience has been in heavy construction, and due to COVID-19, there's been a decrease in income from the spouse. Next slide. So from a case management perspective, how do we cope with those? What are the social determinants and challenges from those issues? So first of all, children homeschooling in COVID-19, I'm a parent, so I get it, I feel it. We have to be aware of how that impacts the injured worker. If there's children at home and they're the primary caretaker, how is that going to affect them attending doctor's appointments? How is that going to affect them attending physical therapy appointments? Attending diagnostics. So we have to always kind of keep that in mind and be sensitive to those issues. The impact of the comorbidities on the current injury and healing. Well, high blood pressure and diabetes have a huge impact on healing. As case managers, we always like to get the total holistic view of the injured worker, excuse me, any of their comorbidities, because those comorbidities affect healing. If there's going to be surgery, medications that they take, if there's any contraindications with the medications. So again, we really need to know all of those issues. The financial situation at home makes a big difference. That injured worker is going to feel pressure, whether they're working or they're not working, if they're not making their full wage, and that affects how they go through their rehab. Difficulty in light duty positions in construction. It's an issue. When we deal personally with construction companies, it's very hard for them to modify positions for someone, say, who's sedentary. That's when a lot of companies use light duty return to work programs through nonprofits. because they can't accommodate sometimes the restrictions that the doctors give them. A lack of transferable skills due to all the experience in manual labor positions and high school education. My background is in vocational case management, so if something would preclude this injured worker from going back to their job on a permanent basis, it would be difficult because most of their experience has been in a high physical demanding position and not a high level of education. But that's not to say there aren't other skills. And we do a transferable skills analysis to see if there's any other skills that that injured worker can use to transfer to other positions. And it was their first workers' comp injury, so doesn't understand the system. Listen, workers' comp is not an easy system. A lot of us have been in it for many years. We know how to navigate it. I know personally when I have friends or family that are in hospitals or getting care, you know, you have to be your own advocate. And lots of times people aren't aware, they don't feel comfortable, they're not educated maybe on some level to do it, there's cultural issues. So it's so important that, that going into a new system like this, that the case manager explains all of that, not just at the beginning, but as we progress through the case, what the expectations are. Next slide. Impact of case management using SDOH approach. Case manager needs to thoroughly review all these issues and challenges and discuss them not only with the injured worker, but the rest of the team, as we discussed. It's important that the case manager separate out what is and what's not related to the injury and be clear with the injured worker regarding expectations of workers' comp, i.e. transportation, light duty. Again, because this guy is new to the system, he might think that, you know, all his transportation is paid for. That everything is paid for, and there's limits. And we have to, as case managers, educate the injured worker on those things. Ensure the injured worker has a clear understanding of the injury and realistic expectations for healing. That is so important. I see that so many times with injured workers that are debating about doing surgery. You know, the doctors sometimes don't spend a lot of time with them, and they don't really have a clear, realistic expectation of what the result of the surgery could be. And they just go headlong into it. So it's really important that they look at all the different options, especially before they go into a surgical situation. We have to ensure the injured worker's spouse is also on board with the above and setting boundaries still as a case manager. So especially if you have an injured worker who is not as verbal, or who is a young injured worker. In this particular situation, he's older, but we want to make sure that the family is on board, because if you have a family member that is not in agreement, it's going to cause nothing but problems between you and that injured worker, because that family member is going to be pulling on that injured worker psychologically, socially, and it's going to put you, a case manager, in a really difficult situation. So you really want to maintain that trust with that injured worker's spouse or significant other as well. And lastly, enlighten the injured worker to community-wide resources available to him and his family. You know, when there are boundaries, when there are certain things that workers' comp might not pay for or a service they might not do, part of what we can do as case managers is research and give this information to the injured worker of community-wide resources, other options and other avenues for them to look for additional help. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you all so much. I don't know if Rafi is back on. There he is.
Thanks, Molly.
No,
Appreciate that. I don't know what happened. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. Let's hand it off to you, Geraldine. So we've got an individual who's struggling, right, to some degree, certainly with the injuries associated with the claim, but things that are happening at home. Help us out. What kinds of things can you talk to him about? What kinds of things can you help him out with?
Absolutely. I love this case because it really does highlight what kind of seems like an ordinary type presentation that can actually become really rich the more that we dig into it. And I want to thank Molly for just doing a fantastic job covering social determinants of health. And for that reason, I'm going to go a little bit lighter on my introduction. Next slide. But basically, the idea is exactly what we're all discussing. There are these external factors, and we've all seen claims go south after the perfect recovery plan has been designed because of external factors that feel outside of our control or feel confusing or can't be mitigated in any way. And these include things like the environment, what access the person has to healthcare services, what their attitudes are about healthcare services, if they've encountered discrimination in the healthcare system, or if they've just have cultural attitudes. I have patients who don't want to take medication, don't believe they should take more than 3 medications, just sort of arbitrarily, not for any scientific reason, or are for or against pain medication, blood pressure medication, antidepressants, you name it. And these largely have to do with cultural and personal factors. And depending on the case, it's really important to understand the individual that's in front of you. Next slide. So in terms of a case, I think of someone who's working in construction, and sometimes I encounter these issues with health literacy, meaning understanding what is actually being proposed, because that person may not have had any contact with the healthcare system before that, or they may end up with kind of a sophisticated injury like a crush injury or a catastrophic injury, but not be a very sophisticated person as it was. And this can affect, as Molly was pointing out, compliance with treatments, whether they understand why something is being proposed. Some people believe they should go into this world the way God put them, and you should never implant anything or touch anything or cut anything, or have a prosthesis or anything like that. And those can cause real challenges in terms of teaching somebody to adapt and overcome an injury, or even get well. Also, we know with social determinants of health, particularly when they're in the poverty direction, that they predict the presence of something called negative health behaviors. So people who live in disadvantaged households and disadvantaged neighborhoods tend to smoke more. They tend to have a poorer diet. They tend to be more at risk for substance abuse. They tend to not exercise. This may all be due to access reasons. These are not social stigmas. They are facts that emerge from real circumstances for real reasons. And they may have uncontrolled health conditions such as diabetes, high blood pressure, or obesity. And I think about this particular claimant, and I think about my typical construction workers, and a lot of times they are smokers, they are overweight, they may be very strong from their job, but they may be deconditioned in other ways, and so that could have put them at risk for the injury to begin with, and it can certainly stall their recovery. Next slide. And so it's really important also as the clinical psychologist in the room, and probably as the person that some people fear in claims, and I understand that because I think there's a long history of psychiatry and psychology, kind of more newly in the last 20 years or so, involvement in workers' compensation, and it can certainly complicate a claim, but it can also ameliorate a claim. And Molly was talking about the sense of perceived injustice that can occur, and many other social factors. And I would argue that when necessary, mental health treatments, cognitive behavioral therapy, coping strategies, which I'll talk more about in a couple of minutes, can be extremely powerful ways in which to engage an injured worker, to allow the injured worker to be a part of their treatment, to teach them self-management, and also to teach them how to recover, which I'm going to cover in just a couple of minutes. But basically, we do know that mental health interacts with social determinants of health, that there are more risk factors present when someone has a disadvantaged background, and therefore mental health issues are more prevalent. And this includes serious mental illness like bipolar, depression, trauma, but it can also just include challenges such as low-grade depression or dysphoric or panic attacks or anxiety. And these affect job choices, they affect where the person lives, and they mutually affect the choices that that person makes throughout their life. Next slide. And so just briefly, kind of as the voice of reason and science in the room, I just want to remind everyone that people with primary medical conditions, about 30% of the time have a coexisting mental health condition, and people with primary mental disorders, and this can include any diagnosis, including trauma, depression, and anxiety, or something like bipolar, about 68% of the time, almost 70% of the time, they have a coexisting medical condition. So I would suggest that it is very difficult, in fact, to tease out like a pure medical injury. I see very few cases like that. And it's important to appreciate these other social and mental health determinants as we're treating the injured worker. Next slide. So when I look at a claim, obviously I'm coming from a mental health claim, and I would invite all of you to also consider personal, family, and substance abuse history in an injured worker, because these can be strong predictors of the course of a claim. And so the injured worker's personal mental health history, whether it was absent or present, and their family history. There is a strong genetic component to disorders like bipolar and serious mental illness, psychosis, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, and substance abuse obviously can strongly influence the course of a claim. And so we need to remember a new injury can produce a new mental health problem. This individual has chronic pain, and we know that pain and depression coexist. And this individual could have never had depression before in their lives and developed depression as a consequence of their injury. Doesn't mean it's a death sentence. It just needs to be addressed and not ignored. A new injury could also worsen an old mental health problem. So if an individual had a history of multiple depressive episodes or had a history of trauma, that injury could cause a new exacerbation or inflammation of that injury. And then finally, I think something that most treating providers and claims folks aren't really aware of is that old mental health issues can also influence adjustment to a new medical injury. And so we know that that coexistence that I was just showing you in those other diagrams, that can influence wound healing, need for medication, hospitalization stay, amount of medication used, and all of these factors. So we need to be cognizant of it, not stigmatize the injured worker, but be aware that this is a factor we need to take into account. And related to that, I wasn't sure how many of the attendees had heard about something called adverse childhood experiences, which are called ACEs. And this is decades old research. It actually began in the late 90s by Kaiser Permanente, but it's really enjoyed a newer focus recently in industry, particularly in workers' compensation. And the idea is that there are events that can occur in childhood, and they can either foster resilience or they can create vulnerabilities that are related to negative health outcomes. And what happens is if the person doesn't know how to positively cope with adversity, this can lead to negative health outcomes. Next slide. And so just briefly, and I've given talks that are an hour long just on ACEs, so this is going to be a very cursory review, but there are 10 factors and 3 categories that individuals can be exposed to that are linked in the research with poor health outcomes. And these include physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, neglect, meaning physical neglect or emotional neglect. And this would be someone who was just left at home that was less than the age of 10 for long periods of time. Sometimes children are watching other children without any parental supervision and things of this nature. And then finally, household dysfunction. And that is the presence of mental illness in the household or an incarcerated relative, if a mother was treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. Next slide. And it's been suggested that all of us have probably a minimum of 3 of these events in our background. And divorce is very common, substance abuse is very common, the presence of mental illness in a household is actually fairly common from a just a national standpoint. But the more risk factors that you have, the greater risk of developing a negative health outcome, including things like broken bones, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, sexually transmitted diseases, a number of things. things. And so the idea is that we have to understand the background and these social determinants, because they could come into play in a claim and protract that claim because of these external variables. Next slide. So with our particular case, the things that I think about with this injured worker is, one, that he's male, and that there are some males in certain cultures that can take a physical injury very personally. They can take it as a slight against their manhood. They can take it as a problem within their family. If they went from the head of the household to the back bedroom, this can be very humiliating and upsetting. It can affect the marriage. It can affect intimacy. There is research to suggest that marital status is protective of return to work, that if an individual is married, they're actually more likely to return to work. So this individual is married and has a co-working spouse. He's 55, so he grew up in the United States or maybe in another country in the mid-60s. And so that could have had an influence about his cultural attitudes about medication or surgery, and that might need to be explored or come to bear. The fact that he's unemployed during COVID, I'm going to talk about that, is extremely important, and how active he was before the injury, because we know that the healthier an individual is, obviously, before their injury, the shorter their recovery times are. Next slide. So coronavirus has introduced so many challenges. There's greater social isolation and loneliness, reduced access to healthcare, clinics have not been open, medications are delayed, shipping times are delayed, that many community centers, senior centers, yoga studios, gyms have closed or opened on a limited basis. Faith activities have been suspended or shifted to video. I've had a lot of clients, really suffer from the lack of support within their community or their faith community. And we know that unemployment is dramatically increased, and substance abuse rates and family violence are very high right now because everyone is confined to the home, and rates of depression and anxiety and stress are very high. Next slide. And it's actually been suggested that there's going to be a next wave of challenges with mental health once everything gets back to normal. And this is replete in the news outlets right now. Next slide. And so we know that during coronavirus, with these increased rates of mental health issues and low self-esteem issues, that this can lead to these substance abuse rates and even suicide attempts and completion. And the thing that's relevant to this discussion is that lower income people are reporting a higher impact of these negative health factors than individuals who are higher income. So they're particularly vulnerable. Next slide. And so from my perspective, just kind of in closing, the idea is that we really need to understand the client and their preferences and their background. And Molly did an excellent job of setting up this discussion, and obviously has such a terrific case management experience. I'm sure many of my clients could benefit from working with you, Molly. And asking people what they need or want, and looking for these soft signs. In the Hispanic culture, for example, most people won't present with a complaint of depression, but they will present with a complaint of headache, stomach ache, body aches, insomnia, and this is supported in the research, and it has to do with culturally and socially sanctioned factors. And we need to consider the environment that the person is, if they could do a walking program, if there's even sidewalks in their area, and if there's access to services like a yoga studio or a gym or a church. Next slide. And so just in closing, the last point I want to make as a treating provider is that we have to teach individuals how to overcome these challenges. And this involves sometimes mental health, cognitive behavioral therapy, physical therapy, or occupational therapy, that many times injured workers will say to me, they told me I just needed to learn to live with it, but they didn't tell me how. And so we have to teach these individuals all of these skills about alternatives to medication and how to self-manage and how to treat their mental health distress. Next slide. And so I'm going to close there. So Natalie has time to address her very important components of return to work. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute. Hi, good day, everyone. My name is Natalie Torres. I'm the Senior Director of Client Solutions with WorkFinders USA. For those of you meeting us for the first time today, we are a firm of return to work specialists, and our mission is an intentional route in service to workers to encourage their return to good health and meaningful work. And we're passionate about collaborating with brokers, carriers, employers, and really anybody in the leave space to skillfully interpret the impact of return to work. If I could have the next slide, please. And the next one, please. So what is the purpose of workers' compensation? We are all in service to workers to return all of them to good health and meaningful work. If your focus is not pointed in the direction of this, I encourage you to reorientate yourself. Turn your attention to the social determinants of health to be this new guide through the injured worker experience. If you didn't have a chance to bring this perspective in with a case manager like Molly or with Dr. Dotz, there is an opportunity to bring that in through the return to work process. And social determinants, I think is something that we should all be more familiar with as we're really all in the throes of it, right? COVID-19 has really leveled the field in a way that we've all been affected. Really show me one hand of anyone today who's not been affected. You've experienced an adjustment in food supply availability, access to transportation, changes in family dynamics through lockdowns, and really so much more. And the purpose of our industry is to restore injured human lives to good health and meaningful work. So our intentions are rooted in service to each and every worker that needs us through the return to work process. And on our next slide, we'll talk about service. So service, what does that mean to you? Before I came into work comp, I worked in restaurants for about 20 years. And there, our intention was going as far above and beyond as we could for each one of our guests to cultivate this feeling of that they were our customers for life, for every single person that would walk in that door. Our board meetings were a little bit different. We held these in private dining rooms, and we were discussing our VIP guests and our regulars to the point of their favorite tables. What are their guests and their children's names? What are their preferred orders? We even talked about their transportation needs, their hotel reservations. See, we wanted them to feel loved and taken care of. We wanted them to feel like they did when they were in their families' homes. We wanted them to feel like they were our family. As we look to infuse our industry with new talents, I look to folks in the hospitality industry. Those folks operate on these ideas of service that I think are a great infusion into our workers' compensation space. And I see folks like travelers approach treating workers like professional athletes. And that's what I'm talking about here. I love that. Consider the workers that we're engaging with, VIP guests. And though we don't want them to be returning, we do want them to tell everyone that they have had an experience that was like nothing that they expected in the workers' compensation space. So look at the injured workers' experience this way. Like the service experience in a fine restaurant. This feeling that you get when someone is anticipating your every need. They're waiting on you hand and foot. They're replacing your napkin when you get up. They're filling your glass when it's half empty. The worker's glass is half empty, and that's where we all come in. That is our duty to workers. May I have the next slide, please? So there's two opportunities to address workers' social determinants in the return to work phase. Modified duty. We can do this with insureds on-site or off-site with charities and nonprofits. This is usually earlier on in the claims process when the injured worker has been released back to work and they have temporary restrictions. This is a time where we're often addressing where an injured worker lives, what their access to transportation availability is, the languages that they speak, and any additional considerations that we would need to return them in this capacity. We talked a little bit about this already, the permanently restricted worker. Here we're getting involved later on in the claims process when our worker has no options to return to work at the insured. So our dive is deeper here into what the social factors are in play as we craft a return to work strategy, one that an injured worker can say yes to. This might be the achievement of the next step in education or certification, something as simple as securing your driver's license or maybe a new apartment. Our next slide, please. And this slide is our social determinants of health from a return to work perspective. We're considering how this workplace accident keeps an injured worker from substantially gainful employment and for a lengthy period of time. We're looking at the family income, the ability to meet those obligations, and oftentimes how this creates some great financial difficulties. Through return to work, we're looking closer at the accessibility to transportation, language, work history, employment background, education, family support as the determinants of health, and potentially things that would be keeping them from a successful return to work. Next slide, please. So what happens as we start to craft return to work strategies, either modified duty or permanently restricted, is that we quickly see where workers will need extra support when they make their return to work journeys a success. So how do those social determinants affect the return to work process? They do it deeply. Return to work strategies that we're engaged in, we see these on the daily. So when an injured worker has yet to complete traditional education, the list of opportunities becomes much shorter for them. The lack of a GED can be one of the more challenging case dynamics on the return to work side to overcome when we're out there advocating for workers to employers and setting up job interviews for them. However, collaborating out of the gate with the case managers and everyone else that's involved in the case can get an injured worker into GED classes, and it allows more employers to open up to meeting with the employee as they understand what the worker's doing to fulfill those new opportunities. So similarly, when an injured worker speaks English as a second language, fewer opportunities. And, we look to employers first that, welcome that first language, but would also support their efforts to engage, English as a second language in those courses and making that readily available for all injured workers. Transportation and location, these two go hand in hand in the return to work space when we're advocating for workers to employers. How far is someone from an opportunity, and do they have their own transportation to be able to get there? If a worker relies on public transportation, no worries. Shifting the advocacy to building relationships with employers that are on the bus line in that injured workers community. We're working with a gentleman right now who speaks Spanish as his first language, and he needs to secure his driver's license so we can broaden the scope of job opportunities for him in Illinois. We can do this all over the country. This is simple. Workers in rural markets, the advocacy needs to be direct to those local hiring managers, right, to identify any available positions within that market that we can put them in the room with hiring managers to actually talk about. And how has their workplace injury affected their mental health, or how has COVID raised the additional stresses, and how should we consider that? And yes, of course it has. I myself, just the last couple of days, was feeling extra anxiety. Perhaps it's the Mercury in retrograde, but my husband also returned to work last year after about a 3-year absence due to injuries that he incurred while he served in the Marine Corps a long time ago. And I saw several of his emotional and physical layers. They were peeled up. And then they also took a new place as we walked through the healing journey together. And the support of family, friends, coworkers, adjusters, case managers, everyone saying yes on their return to work journey is really probably the biggest component of it all. The power of that service and positivity. May I have the next slide, please? So let's turn back to our restaurant scene as we consider this return to work scenario and how we would treat this man like our family member to support and overcome these social determinants for a successful return to work. So yes, we've got this gentleman who's 50 years old, had worked in construction for most of his life. He achieved all of that job experience on the job, no high school diploma or traditional education. He's at home with his wife and 3 young children trying to manage this COVID year of 2020. May I have the next slide, please? So our biggest challenges here will be strategizing around this gentleman's lengthy career in construction. It was acquired over 30 years of on-the-job training without a high school diploma. My dad was in construction, and I can remember a time not too long ago that a guy could probably show up on a job and get put to work, and poof, 30 years have gone by, and maybe he never went to high school. So after we meet and assess this gentleman, we're going to understand more about his family needs and those dynamics, and coordinating with case managers like Molly and other providers so we can ensure that we're all facing the same heading. From there, we're going to start surveying his labor market. We're looking for available opportunities that are going to be a good transition from his career in construction. Since those injuries left him permanently restricted to light duty, we're looking for employers who might handle material supplies, site administration, inspections, these kind of employers that we want to build relationships with to identify those available positions. And this is the piece of advocacy that is absolutely required in the return to work process. The individual advocacy on behalf of the worker to potential employers. Calling on employers directly and identifying positions that are available within the restrictions and actually setting up appointments for injured workers. This is the place where we're able to discuss a social determinant like an extensive work history in one field, but no traditional education, and what that individual is doing about it. While that's happening, we're providing him with the easiest way to achieve his GED and all the support that he needs to get it done. While we're also preparing him for job interviews because, well, he hasn't done that in a really long time. So also sharpening computer skills that he may use in some of these light duty positions, perhaps introducing him to AutoCAD and making sure that his skills in Microsoft Office Suite are sharp. Absolutely fluid communication is key to making this return happen. And I think particularly that family dynamics are going to play a big role in return to work success now with the effects of COVID-19 in our lives. And so keeping everyone like that is part of the injured workers' experience in life, and treatments plans must be a part of their return to work efforts, as things are going to change in an instant within children being home, going to school, returning home, communities locking down, spouses working and not. And this brings me back to family. The infusion of them physically saying yes to them every day is such an important part of the recovery process, and the sense of family that we all bring from everyone that touches the injured worker, everyone on our side, on the work comp side, to give them a chance to feel loved and taken care of like family. Next slide, please. Yes, this is a major perspective flip to let the social determinants of health to be our guide as we've all went through this. As we went through this presentation today, doesn't it make more sense to address our core social needs first as we craft recovery strategies for workers with injuries? We talk a lot about advocacy, folks, and this is it. It's not about claim resolution. It's about the injured worker's experience and how they feel as they're walking through the process with us. Our duty is addressing humans' core social needs to support their return to good health and meaningful work while remaining rooted in service to their epic success. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join the conversation today.
Thanks, Natalie. That was awesome. I keep thinking about where were you guys 35 years ago when I was a young attorney, either prosecuting or defending these claims. I mean, it has taken me this long to figure this stuff out. I really, really needed you. Oh my goodness gracious. It is amazing to me how in other industries, been teaching at USF here, the College of Public Health, and for 20 plus years, we have watched other industries learn the things that we are talking about here today. It has taken, I think, our workers' comp industry a long while, but listening to all three of you today, we're there. We are here. We are right smack in the middle of it. And astoundingly, all of the factors that are significant in social determinants of health are part of each and every one of our files. So, gosh, thank you so much. You guys are absolutely awesome. What a great, great discussion. Don't know if we have any questions out there, Chase. Are there any questions that maybe we can answer for the folks that have been listening to us?
Hi. At this time, we've gotten a lot of kudos and thank yous for the great panel that has been presenting so far. So thank you. So big round of applause. Usually if we were in an audience, you'd hear clapping, but we don't have that yet. So amazing presentation. Love the loving the presentation. They're agreeing with what you all have to say, and thank you so much. So again, I don't see any questions. We'll give everybody a couple more seconds into doing that, but thank you. And thank you for pushing advocacy, as we all talked about, that this is what our industry does, do a lot of good things, and we need to remember that. I'm waiting to see if I have any questions come on. Nope, just continued kudos. They agree with everything that you're saying in the scenario. So with that, but you do have the contact information. So all the attendees, take a look at your screen now. You can contact any of the panelists with any questions that you may have or ideas. I'm sure they would love to hear from you.
Can we also, if we have time, can we show because I don't think the panel has had a chance to see the beautiful downloadable graphic. So.
Oh, yeah.
Is it possible for us to show that? So, and a big shout out to Karisk Partners. They helped us put this wonderful graphic together. It's downloadable, and I know this panel would love it if everybody printed out a copy of this and kept it right at their desk and thought through these things as we're working on claims, and as Natalie said, thinking about the people that we're serving. This is a great visual reminder to consider some of the things that might be impacting that claim. So again, big shout out to Karisk Partners for helping us put this graphic together, and thank you, panel.
And if you need it, so in your go-to there's a handout section. So the PowerPoint, this cool handout is there, as well as the next PowerPoint, but this is downloadable. Or again, the contact information, you can contact any of them on the 2020 virtual.complauti.com. The speaker's information is there as well. So thank you. But I did have a question come up. How do you make sure the employers honors the work restrictions?
That's a good one. I mean, from my side, I don't know if we all want to weigh in. I think sometimes having the provider reach out to the work site, which rarely happens, but whenever I have a case manager help me facilitate that, I think sometimes employers do these things out of ignorance. I honestly do, or just complexity, or losing something. So I wouldn't always assume the worst, and try to involve the treater. Molly?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I agree. I think it's just educating. We've been on the phone many times with an employer and actually going over the work restrictions and making sure they understand what that means. Because again, sometimes they're just not knowing. And it's not purposeful. Now, if it is purposeful, then that's a different situation. Then we try to triage that with the injured worker and their supervisor, and if need be, to get the doctor involved. But I think mostly it's all just about education and communication.
Out to HR too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. Folks may just have be ill-informed, and just a matter of bringing everybody to the table so everyone understands what we need to do to point ourselves in the direction of success to all move in the right direction. Yeah, education, communication, absolutely.
If one more, we have another question. If an employee is represented, do you advise AA that you would be meeting with the treater? AA meaning applicant attorney, because I know California AAA.
Yeah, I mean, I can address that from a case management perspective. You know, it depends on the state of jurisdiction of the injury. In certain states, if the injured worker's attorney says you cannot have any contact, that means no contact with anybody. In other states, such as Florida, if he says or she says you can't have any contact with my injured worker, we can still have contact with the providers and kind of go around. As a case manager, I always encourage my case managers to reach out to opposing counsel in writing, not by phone, because I've been burned, and to make sure to send an email to them asking for that authorization, and then to go from there. But it really depends on the state of jurisdiction.
I agree. I'm licensed in Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi, and ex parte communication is generally discouraged, but I'm surprised probably of my workers' comp claimants, about half of them are probably represented. And of the represented folks, there's a good bit where there's communication between the attorneys and the case managers on both sides. I think it has a lot to do with the culture of the claim and the individuals involved, per se. And I think when people are kind of more fair and equitable, that seems to go more easily. And I always appreciate the involvement of case managers, but I know that there have been challenges, and certainly these things need to be openly discussed.
There we go. That wraps up our presentation. So thank you. Any final words, Raphael, before we exit the stage?
As always, thank you so much. Grateful to you, Christian, and to WorkComp Central for the opportunity to present. Really, really grateful for all the folks attending today. What a wonderful, thanks Molly, thanks Geraldine, thanks Natalie. So incredibly thankful for your time and your expertise here today. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yes,
My pleasure. Thank you.